everybody, welcome back to the Airing It Out podcast. Thank you for joining us. Today we have a very special guest, which I am very excited for, but also slightly nervous. We are joined today by Dave Corbin. Dave, how are you doing?
I'm fine, thank you. Thank you very much for inviting me.
Oh.
I'm hoping that people find some value in everything I've got to share with you today.
I think given your credentials, this has been an opportunity which I've not only really wanted for the podcast, I'm excited for, but I also really don't want to mess up. So, how are you doing?
I'm okay. Had some sad news yesterday, sadly.
Oh, did you?
Yeah, because one of the people who I served with in the forces actually passed away yesterday.
Oh.
So I found out about that yesterday, and that kind of put a tinge on how I felt about things. And I think one of the things that I really want to home in on is you've got to be honest with yourself about how you're feeling.
Yeah.
And when people ask you that question, it's more than just, I'm okay. So you have to be real about what you're feeling. So that's why when you asked me, I thought I'm going to say, this is. But I feel okay about it. Yeah. It's just really, I suppose it's sad to lose someone that you served with.
Well, firstly, my condolences. Secondly, I massively respect that. When I was doing all the pre-work for the podcast, one of the first things that I thought would be a really great idea is when I had guests on, I'd ask them how they're doing, but I'd ask them twice. Kind of specifically for that reason, because the first time, I mean, being on the other side of the, on the camera, you're a bit nervous as it is, so you might be like, yeah, I'm alright, a very typical British thing.
Yeah.
But my idea was hopefully by the end of it, you'd be, actually, and be a little bit more open and honest, and this is what happens at the end of the dialogue, but straight out of the gate, smashing it.
But I think it's one of those things with people that we do it all the time. It's very British, like you say.
Yeah.
You know, how are you? I'm okay. Right, on to the next thing, onto the business of the day, without asking really how people are and understanding what might be going on for them in that space at that time.
Yeah.
We don't always spend time to do that.
No.
And you don't have to be engaging with them on business. You could be just talking to someone.
Yeah.
And I think it's really important, one, to give people that time to be able to say where they're really at. Inquire, make a general inquiry about it, and then listen and respond.
Yeah.
Because one thing for me to sit here and say to you that I lost a friend yesterday, but what really helps me is hearing you say that back to me and responding to what I've said.
Yeah.
Rather than just going, sorry about that, Dave, let's get on with the business of what we came here for.
Okay, cool, right.
Yeah. Oh, yeah, I can see how that'd be old, right? Let's get on with the business. So, but it's those sorts of conversations which become really, really important, especially with individuals. And that's the only time that you really find out that someone might be struggling.
Yeah. Yeah, it's the two-way thing.
Yeah.
It's getting out of yourself, but also having it received in somebody else.
Yeah. It validates your feelings. That anyone who'd lost a friend would probably not be feeling 100% chipper. But I think understanding that in yourself, that might be how you're feeling and why that's the case. But having it validated by somebody else is just even more, is much better as well.
So, after an absolutely fantastic start to the episode already, it's going well. Why don't you tell me a little bit about yourself? Who's Dave Corbin?
So, I'm a Londoner. People haven't picked up from the accent. I grew up in London. Family came from the Windrush generation, which, looking back, brought its own problems of identity for me. I wasn't African. I wasn't Jamaican. I wasn't from the Caribbean.
Okay.
I'm a Londoner.
Yeah.
So I have all the traits of being a Londoner, but looking like someone from Africa, and that triggers a lot of things in other people when they see me, when they first come into contact with me. But I grew up in London, went to school, sort of.
Oh yeah.
I wouldn't say that I was.
You're the bad boy.
Yeah, I wasn't the most studious of students. I kind of found playing and mess around far more enjoyable than studying and learning. And London is a big playing ground. There's lots of things you can do in London. left school, not really many academic qualifications, and found myself scratching around trying to find a job. I went and worked in a optician's factory making glasses, spectacles. I did that for about a year, and it just wasn't enough for me, really. I think my first pay packet was £15, 10 pence at the end of the week. I gave my mum a fiver. I used a fiver to get to work for the next week, and I had a fiver to spend. So that was kind of how things were going.
Yeah.
So not really fulfilling any of my ambitions in life. Not that I knew what they were at the time. So I decided to leave and join the army. I joined the army at 17 and 1 month old. And initially I joined for 3 years. I was going to do 3 years and then use the skills that I learned in the army to get me a better position, better work profile. I ended up staying in the army for 30 years. Started off being trained as a tank driver, tank gunner, went on to become a tank commander, and then while I was tank commander, I was also engaged in lots of sports in the army. Gives you lots of opportunities: swimming, rugby. People that know me will probably deny that I was any good at rugby. They'll probably deny I was any good at football. But I did also go on to become Army in Combined Services volleyball captain.
Hey, nice.
And went on tours of America, of Denmark, Cyprus, on several occasions, and played Combined Services level for about 10 years.
Not a bad way to work,
So
is it?
it was great. So I managed to move away from working on the vehicle park and spend a lot of time in a tracksuit and playing sport in different countries and engaging with lots of different people. So
Amazing.
that was great.
So when you were younger, who inspired you?
I suppose I would be lying if I didn't say my dad and my mum were part of my inspiration, mainly because listening to their stories of travelling from the Caribbean in the early 50s to come to the UK, the challenges they faced coming to the UK around finding work, around finding accommodation and bringing up a family. I'm amazed that they stuck it out. Many of my family, cousins, uncles and aunties and that, when it got really, really difficult, I'd say in the early 60s, they sold up and moved back to Barbados. My mum and dad were one of a few that actually stayed in the UK. And you know, all credit to them for wanting to battle it through. My dad was a vehicle mechanic. He wasn't allowed to work on cars. He could only spray them.
Right.
My mum was wanted to train as a nurse, and they wouldn't let her become a nurse. She had to work as a domestic in hospitals. So a lot of their ambitions they had to put on hold in order to stay in this country and bring us up. And I suppose the biggest thing for me is my dad was so, they're all very proud, but he refused to go on the social, on the dole or anything like that, or live in rented accommodation. We've always, since I can remember, always had our own house. And I didn't realise what a big thing that was until I got a lot older. But we always had our own house. We always lived in our own house. And and he brought the whole family up. So they were big inspirations to me.
Yeah, brilliant. So what sort of things scared you when you were young?
I suppose when you're a young kid, there's lots of things that you experience that start to shape your mind and your thinking. I suppose for me, growing up in Tottenham in the 70s was a really difficult time because the National Front were around. There was lots of hate talk around black people. We had attacks taking place. We had riots taking place. I had friends that were being shot at for walking around the streets of Tottenham. And we also had the sus law that was brought in by the police that meant that anyone that looked like me that was out in the evening as a teenager, you're likely to get stopped by the police. They would stop you for no reason, they'd search you for no reason. Some of those practices were not always good. You end up getting beaten up, and you'd end up, getting beaten up for no reason and then left, and then you'd find your own way home, sort of thing. And that was a reoccurring thing for me as a teenager growing up in London, that was happening to me, it was happening to my friends. The stories that were going around, maybe some of them were exaggerated, but they were close to what was happening. And I suppose for me it was a case of, here I am in London, age 17, I'm getting hassle from the police, I'm getting hassle from the National Front. Where am I going to go, which is going to make me safe, and also make sure that I've got some sort of a future? So I thought I'd join the army. I'll get off the streets of London. Me and the police were not having the best of relationships, so I thought I'll get off the streets of London and I'll join the army, and hopefully that would cure things.
Was that a better alternative than sticking around, do you think?
Much better.
Yeah.
Much better.
Brilliant.
And I think, although being in the army was really quite challenging, again, around that time, looking like I do, I didn't choose my regiment very carefully, based on the cultural aspects of that particular regiment. I joined a cavalry regiment, and cavalry regiments of that time, and even today, they don't have very many black people. So I became a bit of a novelty in a cavalry regiment. But I suppose one of the main things about that was I had a number of other young people all joining at the same time as myself, and we banded together as a group to support each other to get through. We became our own subunit within the unit, if that makes any sense. And I'm still in contact with a lot of those people now. I've got probably 5 or 6 of them who I've known for over 47 years. They live locally. In fact, I went to the Isle of Wight yesterday with one of them and his wife, and we had a day out. So that became my mainstay, and the reason for me staying and getting through things. But yes, it was a very good option.
Fantastic. And do you reckon, since the time you were 17, attitudes have changed much?
I think they have. I think they're a lot less visible. Around types of discrimination. I think attitudes towards people in the army have changed a lot. A lot more positive. But I think a lot of the racial discrimination, I suppose the longer I served in the hope that that would disappear, the worse I felt it was going to be, because it was still there. There was always an underlying thing that because you looked different, there were certain things that were expected of you because you looked different, and then you were treated in a certain way. But I would say that it's taken its time to change. The British Army's been around for a long time, so attitudes to most of diversity, women, and the LGBT community, black people, that's changing and changing for the better, and that's slowly changing the culture of the whole organisation. But I think it's still a bit of a challenge in some of those places. Don't know if you've seen anything recently around bullying, around discrimination, around sexual harassment. As the army opened up more and more employments for females, then the cases around sexual discrimination kind of went through the roof as well. Really? So there's still work to be done around that.
Significant change takes time, doesn't it?
The other thing I would mention about the armed forces is that their history, or their background around dealing with people with mental health and post-traumatic stress disorder is if you go back to the Second World War, then there was nothing in place. There was no support in place, and I suppose we went through quite a long period of no conflicts, no major conflicts. We had the Gulf War. We then had all the work that was going on out in Afghanistan as well, and Bosnia, and that then shook the army up, and it had to do something more to support service personnel. And I was in a position at the time where I was able to help to influence some of that around getting community mental health nurses into garrisons to put in place more of a robust method of supporting people who've been into those situations, and to try and keep people in the forces rather than as soon as they start showing signs that they're dismissed. Sadly, a bit like the NHS, there's just not enough resource there for the number of people that were going to be needing it. But at least it's something that the armed forces have started taking on board. Yeah,
I think it's massive that you were part of that change. I mean, not only that change is happening, but I'm speaking to somebody who made it happen.
I wouldn't say I made it happen, but I would say I was an advocate for making it happen. There was lots and lots of discussions about what should have been put in place and how things should have been done. And around that time, I'd managed to move from working in tanks, on tanks, to working in the recruitment process. So while we were in the recruitment process, we were able to influence and have discussions at quite a high level about what was needed, not just to recruit people into the armed forces, but also what was needed to retain people in the armed forces. What sort of support could be needed to do that. So there's lots of things like around housing, around access to doctors, around GP practices. Mental health became part of that as well.
Oh, great. And one last question before we move on to something else to get to know you a little bit. What did you love doing?
I suppose without realising it, I have always been a people person. I've always been interested in understanding and supporting people. So as a youngster at the age of 7, I joined the Boys Brigade. Stayed in the Boys Brigade until I was 16, not long before I joined the army, without realising that everything I was doing there was like my grounding, my basic training for when I joined the army, because I knew how to march, I knew how to press a uniform, I knew how to clean my shoes. So that was really, really important. And in the army, initially all I wanted to be was a corporal, because I saw the corporals as being the most influential people in the troops. And I got to corporal, and I got to sergeant, then I got to staff sergeant, then I got to warrant officer. And I was like, wow. So I'm a warrant officer. I was in the army, but as a staff sergeant, I had a squadron of men, around 173 men. So I was interested not just in getting them to go to work, but also in their welfare, in their banking, in their families. So you become almost like an uncle to 173 grown-up men, and you're there looking after them and doing things you can do to try and support them. So I then left the army. I went to work in Weymouth College. I did 2 years at Weymouth College and then went to work in the NHS, working in an organisation that had like 5,000 people. And then I went to the organisation became bigger. We had 7,000 people. And my whole aim was around people experience. So all around the staff that we've got, the patients who we look after. So I was interested in all of those things. That became my passion. So what do I love? I suppose I love getting to know people.
Yeah, very people orientated.
Everything that I've done has been linked towards people.
Very compassionate.
Yeah.
So you mentioned it briefly there, but I was going to ask you, how did you, what was that pivot like moving from the army to Weymouth College? So it's quite a, like if you look at the army and then look at what you did for the rest of your career, it's quite a contrast. Yeah. So talk to me about how you got from one place to the other.
Yeah, so while I was in the army, I said I got working in recruitment. So I was working in London as at the careers office, and I had an absolutely fantastic office manager called Pete Robinson. I'll never forget. And he was interested in me as a recruiter, but also as a person.
Okay.
So it wasn't just about me working in the recruiting office and how many recruits I could get in. It's what are you going to do with your skills now that you've got them, Dave? What, you know, where do you see yourself going with all of this? And we used to have those conversations about that. And I suppose it was at the time when the first Gulf War kicked off.
Okay.
And I was in the recruiting office, and I walked into my boss's office and I said, Pete, I need to go back. He said, why do you need to go back? I said, my regiment are going to war, and I need to go. I need to be there with them. And he sat me down and he said, Dave, you've got a job to do here.
Yeah.
So, you know, my automatic reaction, and then his response to me was, well, he actually cares about me. So I did a job. We had a response to do, a role to do in London during the Gulf War, which, it wasn't the best, but we were there for casualties and to inform families about what was going on. And then after the Gulf War had finished, he said to me, you know, what are you going to do now? And I said, well, you know, I want to do this, I want to do this. He said, why don't you do some courses? Why don't you get yourself trained? I had no qualifications at that time.
Yeah.
And I thought, okay, I'll think about it. So I did some qualifications in IT, basic IT, customer service. And I started thinking, oh, crikey, all that stuff I was told at school about being thick. I'm not thick.
Yeah.
I'm actually quite good at some of this stuff. I just needed to apply myself. So I got some really good results, got distinction in customer service. So I've got some more skills. And then I got called back from the recruiting office to go back to the regiment on promotion. And that was when I was at Bovington as the Squadron Quartermaster Sergeant. I was there.
Yeah.
So I did that job, and I was really proud to. I'll never forget. I took pictures of myself and my kids. The first morning, I put my Staff Sergeant's uniform on to go to work because I thought it was a really proud moment. So I did that for 2 years, and then a colonel from recruitment in London came down to see me in Bovington. He didn't come to see me. They came for a conference that was taking place in Bovington. Yeah. But while he was there, he came down to see me, and he says, he used to call me Sergeant Major, even though I wasn't the Sergeant Major at the time. He said, Sergeant Major, he said, what are you doing here? I said, well, I'm the quartermaster for the vehicle squadron. I provide all the vehicles for all the wings, and I'm working here. He says, your skills are wasted here.
Really?
He said, your skills are wasted here. We want you back in London, to recruit in London, and we want you to run the Armed Forces Careers Office in central London in Charing Cross.
Oh, yeah.
Ooh, that sounds like a good job. He says, yep, and you're going. We want you back. I'll be in touch. He went away. 2 days later, I got a posting order. Went back to the recruiting office in London, which had opened up the style of recruitment that I was doing before. Before I was basically in an office dealing with anyone who came into the office with the occasional school visit. Now I was in the Armed Forces Careers Office, and we were more intent in going to job centres and doing lots of big events, doing stuff at Earl's Court, going out with big corporations. I think Times newspaper, we did a number of recruitment events with those as well. And that became really, really good. And then I got a visit from a colonel from Bovington.
Okay.
And he came to see me. And they would go around and do office inspections on recruiting offices. And he came to see me, he was asking me questions about it all. And he asked me what I thought about the course at the school that I'd done some years before. And I said, it's a good course. He said, but it's a bit out of touch with what's actually happening in recruitment offices. So he invited me down to become an instructor at the school. And being a tank man, I told my regimental sergeant major at the time that I was going for the job at the school, that I'd been invited to go down. And he laughed. And he said, there's no way they're going to have you. You've not been in the job long enough.
Okay.
So I went for the job, and I got the job. And I went back and saw the regimental sergeant major and said, I got the job.
Damn right.
Yeah, I said, I got the job. I'm not one for quitting. I don't quit this stuff. No. So I got the job. Worked at the school for 8 years, and that then also opened up another avenue of opportunities. So at the school we did all the basic stuff about how to recruit people into the army, but we also did things about security clearance.
Okay.
We did things about equality and diversity. We did things about interview skills. We did things about people management. So we did all of that. We're teaching that at the school, and then I was invited to go and become equality diversity advisor for the School of Recruiting. So I went and done a job there. So when I left the army, I got a job at Weymouth College as equality and diversity advisor.
Yeah.
So I didn't know when I went into school, into the recruiting world, that that was where it was going to take me. But actually, it brought me a great deal of opportunities from doing that. So I went and done Weymouth College for 2 years.
It's quite the journey to get there as well, isn't it?
Yeah, but like I say, if you don't put yourself in a position, if you don't put yourself in that position, then you never know what other opportunities are going to come up.
Yeah.
I could have just stayed in the regiment.
Yeah.
I could have just stayed at the school. But I wanted to, if I've got these skills and this ability to do things, I want to be able to use those again to help other people.
Yeah.
So that was really good.
So you mentioned you had somebody in your life who was not only interested in your work, but interested in you as an individual. What difference do you think that made to you?
I suppose in a regiment, there's so many of you when you're working in a regiment that you're touching, you're making contact points with people all the time, but you'll never really, people are never really showing a real interest, in-depth interest in you as a person.
Yeah.
I suppose you get your appraisals each year, but it's mainly about, what you're doing with your job, how you performed, what do you want to do in the next year, what courses do you want to do, where do you see yourself going? And you don't, I suppose, my close group of friends know me.
Yeah.
And I would say that I know them. We've gone through so much together as people. But people in the army that you're working with, as long as you can get up, hold your gun, point it in the right direction, hit what you're meant to be hitting, that's kind of as far as it goes, that you're able to do your job really well. But it was a different level of connection, someone to actually say, what do you actually want to do? How are you actually feeling about this? Where do you want to go with things?
It goes beyond that barrier of professional and personal.
Yeah.
And I think when someone else does that for you, you're like, whoa, okay.
Yeah.
Like, you don't expect it, do you?
No, it was out of the blue, and it did make me think to myself, why am I racing to go to war? Why am I racing to go and get shot at? Maybe not a good thing. But it just changed the way that you're thinking, and I think that level of interest and connection is what I always try to give to other people as well.
Yeah.
I don't see myself as just, throughout my whole job, as just Dave Corbin, the manager. I'm Dave Corbin, the person who is a manager. And I want to connect with people. I want people to be able to remember me and that I did something positive while we were connected.
Yeah, you want to give them a good reason to remember.
Yeah, and I think, I've delivered reams of training to people. It's really strange. And I've now come back to live in Wareham. And I went to the hospital. As you do when you get older, you have to go for these regular checkups. Yeah. But one of the nurses there said, you gave me my equality and diversity training when you were part of healthcare. And she says, I remember you, and I remember what you said. I went, oh, that's great. That's really that's really pleasing. And that's like 8 years, 10 years ago. But for people to have that kind of legacy, for people to actually remember what you said, or why you said it, or the influence you've made when you're saying it, means that, again, it makes you feel good that you've done something positive along the way.
And so what sort of things kept you in the job? What motivated you towards and through your equality and diversity work?
I suppose one of the things that was said to me when I was in the army was that you care too much for your men.
Yeah.
You care too much for your men, and I thought, damn. Good. I'm glad I do. I'm glad somebody else has noticed.
They shouldn't be expendable.
No. I really do care about them.
Oh goodness.
So that's what was said to me while I was in the army. So when I was working in the NHS, a lot of the things that I was doing around the staff I was coming into contact with, I used to do all the staff inductions over a period about equality and diversity. So understanding where they're at, where the organisation's at, and how together we can improve that. And I think some people think that equality and diversity is all about race, when it's so much more. And that discrimination is only about discrimination that happens between black and white. So much more. It's so much more. And I think helping people to understand that concept, and also that at some point in their lives, they could be faced with discrimination themselves for one reason or another, that it's important that we try to eliminate all forms of discrimination for everybody. Because if we only focus on the black and white thing, it ain't never going to change. It isn't never going to change. So how is the concept of equality, diversity and inclusion and eradicating any type of discrepancies that are going on, how is that going to influence the way that you work and the way that you behave going forward? So it's throwing those tools at people to say, well, you know, how do you do this? What is it that you need to do? So I think that's really, really important. And of course, within all of that is the challenges around mental health. Again, the mental health services within the NHS historically have always struggled to meet the needs of individuals. I would say that there were some practices that were not very good. And I would say that the practices that were good were not always shared with everybody.
Okay, really?
So there are a number of studies that were done into mental health and access to mental health by black male people, black men. But what it showed was it's the Count Me In census was the one, and I think the final report was in 2012. Which is available where people wanted to look for that. But it showed that the access to mental health services was really quite poor, and that for black people, black men in particular, were highly overdosed, were put into secure units, and the treatment in the secure units was not what it should have been. And many of the other low-level treatments that people had access to, like speaking therapies, talking therapies, art therapies, walking in nature, all those type of things were not being offered to everybody. They're being offered to some, but not to everybody. You know, but if you're black and you're male, you're going to go into a secure unit, and that's where we're going to treat you. If you get the chance, have a read of Frank Bruno's. Have a read of Frank Bruno's experiences of mental health services.
Okay, right.
He came down to Bournemouth and did a talk there. Which was brilliant, absolutely fantastic. But listen to what he says. But his experiences for someone who is, a pretty high profile individual. What he experienced is the same as what's been happening all the way down into the organisation. So there was a real challenge there to move the dial on that, and that is still happening. That is still really happening. There's not enough services for how people want to access them. So I've worked with help setting up the Dorset Mental Health Educational Recreation Centre. And they really do make a positive impact on working with people who've had lived experiences of mental health and giving them alternatives and using them to inform and educate service providers.
I love that.
So when they first set up, we did a cycle ride around Hamworthy, the lake in Hamworthy, and there was someone there that had never ridden a bike before but was determined to have a go. And we managed to get them on a bike, and they managed to get all the way around the park. We did, with Access Dorset, I did run fundraising in Weymouth Pier, a pier run there. And I remember doing that run with someone in a wheelchair.
Really?
And he was struggling in his wheelchair, and I said, well, if I can run it, you can push yourself out. Come on, we'll go out together.
Yeah.
So we did that. We had people from Dorset Mental Health Forum setting up football teams. People who, the way that illnesses had been going, that they were going to be completely kicked to one side and not invited to do anything. Actually, they said, well, actually, why don't we play football?
Yeah.
And they play football. They started their own little football club and they play football. So I just think that things are changing in all of those areas, and I'd like to see those changes happen, because we can't have that disproportionate impact on certain parts of the community.
No, absolutely not.
And not go back and challenge it. We have to make sure that we try and give people the opportunity to do things.
Yeah, a pillar of the podcast that we've had from the beginning, is that mental health isn't discriminate, so neither can we be.
No.
I know the predominant demographic here is, and the people that we're trying to reach are young males, but it affects everybody, regardless of who you are, and you can't exclude somebody for being different.
No, and I think in my time of delivering training and doing consultations with people, I worked as a freedom to speak up guardian for some time. And because of what happened in the NHS, where people had either witnessed or they had experienced indiscretions, and they tried to report it and then were basically gaslighted, people just ignored them, didn't want to listen to what they said, then they came to speak to a freedom to speak up guardian and raise those issues. Sometimes those people are that scared that they don't want to be identified. Sometimes those people are quite clearly having some serious mental health issues, either because of what they've experienced, which is now driving that, or because of the fear of what they might experience, that could be driving it. So they want anonymity, they want to stay private, they don't want to tell you about what's going on. But in a role as a freedom to speak up guardian, you have to be there to really listen to what people are saying.
Yeah.
Sometimes what you're hearing can be really quite difficult.
I can imagine.
Sometimes what you're hearing can be really, what they are putting themselves through, what they are doing to try and manage their situations, that can be really quite, they're not eating, they're not drinking, substance abuse. So all of that, listening to all of that, without overreacting to what's being said to you, and part of it is not only how can I support you to sort out the problem that you're facing, but how can I support you to stop doing what you're doing to you? How can I encourage you to access some of our services? How can I encourage you to maybe go and speak to someone on a professional level about what's going on? How can I support you to maybe go and get yourself a lawyer to maybe challenge some of this? Because it's, the wide range of things can be amazing. And I think the thing is also that when people end up in that position and they're on a downward slope, it could have been going on for years. It could have been going on for the trigger that happened. Could have been 3-4 years ago. So why do you think that? You can't think that when they come to you within a day you're going to solve it all. So they become long-term missions of actions that you then put together, and you continue to support people through that. Maybe even long time after you've corrected the issues that they were facing, you're still there. So I left the NHS September last year. I'm still in contact with people who I've supported while I was working within the NHS.
Wow.
And those people still feel comfortable coming and talking to me and chatting to me. And I like that. I like the fact that they would contact me, that they would feel able to do that, and we can have a conversation.
You're doing bloody good work, Dave. Amazing.
I do try.
It's inspiring. This has been a Common Bird production.